Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Burnout is not a new topic of conversation, frankly, because it continues to be a problem. And burnout is not even a new topic of conversation for this podcast. If you've been listening or watching this podcast for a while, you know that I've done more than one episode on the topic of burnout. But today, what I'd like to focus on is burnout and managers at the workplace. It's absolutely critical that managers take responsibility for the burnout that their employees are experiencing. And this absolutely has to happen on multiple levels. What that means is understanding the prevention of burnout, understanding the root causes of burnout as it manifests within your workplace, understanding the manager's potential contribution to burnout, and of course, recovery. Managers absolutely cannot use ignorance as an excuse or a reason for not addressing burnout within their own team. You can't, as a manager, use the ignorance of what burnout is or how it looks, how it presents itself, or how to deal with it. Those simply are not reasons why you should not be proactive in addressing burnout on your team. And even if you think this has worked for you in the past as a manager, ignoring signs and symptoms of burnout is counterproductive, and it can actually be harmful. It can be detrimental both to individual employees and to the organization as a whole. Something else that's important to point out that I've actually encountered as an industrial and organizational psychologist: asking an employee who is already in the state of burnout to come up with their own solution for how to resolve being in that state, how to get out of that state, is not the answer. That is actually making things worse because you're asking them to do one more thing where they're already burnt out. And by the way, that is not the same as asking your employee what he or she needs from you in order to recover from burnout. So those are two very different things. Participating and coming together to find a resolution, to find healing for the employee is one thing. Asking them to figure it out on their own is a whole different thing to consider and is not something I would advise. Now, you may, as a manager, think that modeling the right kind of behavior would be good enough as a way of preventing burnout on your team. And while modeling the right kinds of behavior is important, that simply isn't enough. You can model the right behavior all day long, but if you demand other behaviors from your employees, whether that's intentional or not, whether that's conscious or not, if that is not aligned with their reality, then you can model the right behavior all day, every day, and it won't matter because your employees will not have the opportunity to copy that behavior, to follow what you're modeling for them. So the bottom line is this: dealing with burnout at the workplace is part of your responsibility as a manager, and you absolutely have to be proactive. And proactive applies to every state or every stage of being burnt out, whether that's prevention, whether that's dealing with being in the midst of it, or dealing with it afterwards, after somebody has managed to recover from being in that state of burnout. So as a manager, you have to be proactive in all stages of burnout. The other thing to remember and realize as a manager is that burnout is not just something that happens to one individual or one individual at a time. Burnout can happen on a collective level. So you may start with one or two people getting into that state of burnout, but it's entirely possible for an entire group or an entire team to get into that state collectively. So as a manager, not only do you have to be aware of that, but you need to know what to do about it. Here are some basics related to burnout. Burnout is not just being stressed out. Burnout is far beyond being stressed out. When somebody is burnt out, it is the result of having been stressed out over a long period of time and having depleted whatever they had in terms of their ability to deal with stress. Because regardless of how well prepared you are to deal with stress, you cannot be exposed to stress and required to deal with it on an indefinite basis without a break. When we deal with stress, we have to be able to replenish our reserves for dealing with stress. So you cannot be forced to deal with stress indefinitely without real breaks. That's what leads to burnout. You use up all of your fuel, all of your reserves that you had specifically for dealing with stress. And yet, stress continues to assault you and to be a reality in your life, requiring that you handle it, that you deal with it somehow. This is how burnout happens. It's important to remember that burnout affects all areas of life. It's not just work. It affects your personal life as well. But beyond that, it affects us on every level. Physical health, emotional health, psychological health. So we have to be aware of that so that we can properly recognize when somebody is in the state of being burnt out or is heading in that direction. Equally as important is the ability to recognize what kinds of things will contribute environmentally to somebody getting burnt out. You as the manager need to absolutely be aware of all of those things and to be on the lookout for potential dangers. Let's look at some of the symptoms that are associated with burnout. By no means is this an all-inclusive list. This is just the tip of the iceberg to give you a very basic idea of what one can expect to see in a case of someone who is feeling burnt out, who has reached that state of being burnt out. A person can have physical symptoms. They can have fatigue. They can have ailments such as headaches or maybe digestive issues. They may be restless, unable to sleep. They may be unable to concentrate. They may be irritable. They may not be engaged, whether that's in their tasks and responsibilities at work or other people, both at work and outside of work. They may not be able to sleep the way that they used to be. They may become easily overwhelmed or maybe easily irritated in ways that is out of character for them. Someone may experience anxiety or depression or be forgetful. So as you can see, there are so many potential symptoms that could be linked to the state of burnout, that you really have to pay attention to what's going on with your employees. You have to be able to know people on your team, those who report directly to you. So that means you can't be an absentee manager and exist in ignorance or oblivion to what's going on with your employees. In order to notice subtle changes in somebody's behavior or maybe in somebody's performance, you have to understand what their norm is, what their baseline is. If you don't know someone, how will you know whether or not they're doing okay or whether or not they're stressed out or potentially burnt out? Now, I understand that some of you manage more people than others, but this is where team leaders and other layers of different types of management come in to help you as a manager so that you get to know what is normal for the people under your care, so to speak, under your management, so that you can then notice when things are heading in the wrong direction or where things are not right. You also have to be aware and cognizant of the environment in which you and your employees work. If you work in an environment that is stressful, it's only a matter of time before people start to experience burnout. So a stressful environment cannot be accepted as the norm or as the way that it is for your team and your organization. Once again, these are the kinds of things that you as a manager absolutely has to be aware of and be proactive in fixing as they need to be fixed. As I already mentioned earlier, as the manager, you have to be proactive not only when there's a crisis, but in the before, the now, and the after stages of burnout. You have to be proactive in creating the kind of environment that prevents burnout from happening. That's the before. The now is if somebody is in the state of burnout, how do you help that person to heal and get beyond and out of that state? And of course, the after is how do you help and create the kind of environment that will prevent a recurrence of burnout for your employees and your teams. So again, I can't stress enough how important your role is as a manager when it comes to burnout at the workplace. I think we have talked about burnout quite extensively, but it has always been focused or often been focused on symptoms and solutions, but somehow the individual is frequently the target of the responsibility. That's who needs to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. That's who needs to initialize change. That's who needs to do whatever needs to be done in order to heal from being burnt out. But that is only a small part of reality. The individual has to be part of a team, and that team includes the manager. So as this episode is focused on the manager's responsibility when it comes to burnout, I can't stress enough that managers absolutely cannot continue to ignore this issue or to pass the buck onto the individual or onto HR and expect things to magically fix themselves or somehow go away. I encourage all of you, whether you're in a management role or a non-management role at your organization, to check out my previous episodes on burnout. Those have some good content for you to digest. In addition, I've also created a toolkit, a handout for managers to have a better understanding of burnout, its symptoms, and what you can do to be of help, how you can be proactive and responsible when it comes to burnout. You can find that by using the link below. But remember that this information is not only beneficial to managers. Even if you're not in a management position, please take advantage of this free handout. Check it out and see how you can use it as a guidance, as a starting point for you to address burnout in a productive way, in a way that can be helpful to you, and if you're a manager, to your employees as well. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. As I've already mentioned, burnout is not a new topic of conversation because it continues to be a problem. But what often is missed is the responsibility of managers in terms of the entire epidemic of burnout. Managers have a tremendous responsibility to be proactive before, during, and after burnout. You have to be aware of what's going on with your employees in order to notice changes, whether that's changes in personalities, behaviors, performance, etc. As a manager, it is absolutely part of your job to deal with burnout on all levels. You also have to understand that burnout isn't just limited to individuals. Burnout can happen on collective levels, as in groups or teams. Again, as a manager, that's part of your responsibility. I have created a toolkit, a free handout that you're welcome to take advantage of. Use the link below to take a look at that specific tool. It's specifically created for managers, but anybody can benefit from it. Let it be your guide, let it be your starting point so that you can come together with your employees as a team, as a collective, in order to prevent burnout, help people to heal from burnout if they're already in that state, and prevent recurrence afterwards. It is absolutely part of your job responsibility. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the handout, to watch some of my previous episodes that focus on burnout, and come together with your employees to address this very important issue that we are seeing at the workplace in increasing numbers. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to consider burnout as it may exist or be a potential for you individually, but also for others within your workplace, whether you are a manager or not. It's important to understand burnout for what it is, be able to create preventions, and be able to heal from burnout, as well as know how to prevent it from recurring. So I encourage you to take the information from this episode, encourage you to look at previous episodes, and absolutely encourage you to take a look at the handout that I created so that you can use that as a guide, as a starting point for being proactive in dealing with burnout at the workplace. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While there, you can also check out some of the other videos which focus on stress management. So check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.